I work in risk analytics for a mid-size hedge fund in Midtown. That's all the detail I can give about the firm. What I can tell you is that in May 2023, I found something in our data that 6 months of SEC investigation couldn't explain, and I still don't sleep the same way I used to. Let me walk you through what I do, because you need to understand why this bothers me. My job is to look at trade flow, our fund's fills, the counterparties, the venues, the whole ecosystem we plug into. Prime brokers give us aggregated data on execution quality. Part of my week is running distributional tests on that stream. Boring stuff. Kurtosis, skew, whether anyone's front-running our block orders. The kind of work where finding something interesting means you get to send a Slack message with an actual chart in it. In April, I was running a routine sweep on a new dataset our head of execution had subscribed to. Tick-level data covering a slice of equity options activity going back 3 years. The vendor sold it as flow intelligence. I was supposed to look for correlation between the flow and next day price movement, so our traders could piggyback if there was signal. There was signal. That isn't the weird part. Options flow leads spot movement all the time. Insurance companies hedge, family offices telegraph their views, whatever. You expect some accounts to be predictive. The weird part was one account. The vendor anonymized identities but tagged them with a persistent hash so you could track behavior over time. There was one hash, I'll call it account 41 because I don't want to write the real string, that had a return distribution I have never seen and never expect to see again. 3 years of data, thousands of trades, not a single loss. I want to be clear about what that means. In options, even a genius trader loses. Volatility crushes premium. Underlyings gap the wrong way overnight. Earnings surprise, Fed pivots. Everyone loses sometimes. The best directional traders in the world win maybe 60% of the time and make it up on size. Renaissance, at their peak, was around 70. Account 41 was 100. Not rounded, not well, if you exclude the small ones. Every single position, opened and closed, in the green, and not by pennies. The average trade was up somewhere between 6 and 11% on notional, closed within hours of opening. I thought it was a data error. That was my first hypothesis. Bad hash collision, or the vendor stripping losing trades by mistake. I spent a Friday cross-referencing the timestamps against public tape. The trades existed, real fills, real prints on the exchange. I could see them clearing. I built a Monte Carlo, simulated a trader with skill in the 99.99th percentile, generous edge, generous position sizing, ran a million paths over 3 years of comparable market conditions. 0 paths produced what account 41 produced, not 1. When I tightened the win rate assumption toward 100 to see what edge would be required, the simulation returned nonsense. The p-value on this being a real trader was so small, my compiler kicked it out in scientific notation with an exponent I had to squint at. I showed it to a friend at another shop. He does execution research for a market maker, the kind of guy who reads academic papers about microstructure for fun. I sent him the sanitized numbers over Signal. He called me within 10 minutes. "Where did you get this?" I told him it was from a vendor stream. He was quiet for a long time. "This isn't a trader," he said. This is somebody who already knows the answer. That was my thought too. Insider trading, somebody with access to non-public information running a pattern across multiple names to disguise it. So I started looking at what account 41 was actually trading. That was the second thing that stopped me. If it was inside info, you'd expect a cluster. Same sector, same corporate action type, same handful of tickers that the trader had a source at. Mergers at biotech, or earnings at a specific tech name, something like that. Account 41 traded everything: semiconductors, regional banks, a furniture retailer nobody has ever heard of. Airline puts 1 week, coffee futures optionality the next. There was no informational thread I could pull. The only thread was timing. Every entry landed in the final 15 minutes before a material move. Not the day before, not the morning of. The last 15 minutes. Sometimes the last 4 minutes. Consistently, across 3 years, across every asset class in the dataset. I couldn't build a model for that. I tried. I threw everything at it. order book imbalance features, macro surprise indices, dealer positioning proxies, options market-making inventory estimates. Nothing predicted with better than coin flip accuracy the moves this account was catching. Whatever it was seeing, my toolkit could not see. I brought it to my boss on a Tuesday. He's a former trader, 40 years in the business, hard to impress. He looked at my slides for maybe 6 minutes and then said, "Write it up, I'll send it upstairs." 2 weeks later, I got a call from our compliance officer asking me to walk through my methodology with someone from the SEC. Not an investigation of us, a referral. We were doing our civic duty. The SEC person was polite and clearly competent. She asked good questions. She asked for my code. She asked whether the vendor could have fabricated the data, and I explained why they couldn't have, because I'd validated against the tape. Then she went quiet for 6 months. In November, her office called back. The finding was that no violation had been identified. She wouldn't give me more than that on the phone. When I pushed, gently, she said the account was real, the trades were real, and no evidence of illegal activity had been surfaced. She said it in the flat voice people use when they're reading from a document. I asked whether they had identified the account holder. She said she couldn't comment on that. I said, "Can you at least tell me if a human being is trading this account?" There was a pause I still think about. Then she said, "I'm not able to discuss the specifics of the investigation," and she hung up. Account 41 is still trading. I still have access to the vendor feed. I check it maybe once a month when I'm bored or when the market does something surprising and I want to see if the account caught it. It always does. The win rate is still 100. The pattern hasn't changed. I've shown the data to 3 of the best statisticians I know. One teaches at Columbia. One runs a research desk uptown. One is at a firm I won't name that does the hardest quantitative work on the street. All 3 said some version of the same thing. This shouldn't exist. The numbers are wrong in a way numbers are not supposed to be wrong. The Columbia guy sat with the printout for a long time, and then he said something I kept coming back to. It shouldn't be, but it is. I don't have a spooky ending for you. Nobody broke into my apartment. I didn't get followed on the subway. There's no figure in the window across the street. My life is the same as it was in April 2023, except that now, when I open my terminal in the morning and pull up the market, I know that somewhere out there is an account that has never been wrong. Not once. Not in 3 years, not in any environment, not in any asset, and whoever or whatever is on the other side of it. The SEC looked for 6 months and could not find them. That's the part I can't put down, not the impossibility, the looking. The house had been empty for 3 months when I finally drove out to deal with it. My father left it to me in the will, along with the debt on it and a note from his lawyer saying I had 30 days to decide what to do or the bank would decide for me. So I took a Friday off, drove down from Baltimore, and told myself I'd have it cleared out by Sunday night. The estate sits about 6 miles off Route 33 in the woods outside Stanardsville, Virginia. 2 stories, red brick, slate roof that leaks in 2 places I know about. My grandfather built it in 1952. My father grew up in it, and I grew up in it until I was old enough to leave, which was the day after my 20th birthday. I hadn't been back inside since 2008. I got there around 4 in the afternoon, October, so the light was already going soft. The gravel drive was full of pine needles and one of the porch steps had rotted through. The wind was moving in the pines. Somewhere down the ridge a dog was barking, and then it stopped. I stood there with the key for a good minute before I put it in the door. Inside smelled like my father. Not death, nothing dramatic. Just pipe tobacco and old paper and that specific dust that only sits in houses where nobody opens the windows. Everything was where it had always been. His reading chair, the clock in the hall that ticks 1 second slow, the framed photograph of my mother on the sideboard, taken before I was born. I made coffee in the kitchen and started on the ground floor. Books into boxes, dishes into boxes, the good silver into a bag I'd take back with me. He didn't own much. My father was not a man who accumulated things. He wore the same brand of shirt for 40 years and drove the same truck for 22. By 9, I had most of the downstairs done, and I was tired enough to eat a sandwich standing at the counter and go to bed in the guest room, which had been my room, which still had the wallpaper I picked out when I was 11. Saturday, I did the upstairs. His bedroom took 2 hours. His clothes went into contractor bags. I found a shoebox under the bed with my mother's wedding ring in it, and a photograph of the 3 of us at Virginia Beach when I was maybe 4. I put the shoebox in my car, which left the office. The office is on the ground floor, off the back hall, and the door had been locked my entire life. When I was a kid, I asked about it exactly once, and my father said, "That's my office," in a tone that ended the conversation. My mother never went in there either, as far as I know. She died when I was 7, and the door stayed shut through all of that too. I used to press my ear to it sometimes when he was in there working. I never heard anything, not typing, not a chair moving, nothing. Just him being in there and me being out here. I looked for the key first. I went through every drawer in the house, every jacket pocket, the little brass dish by the front door, the glove box of the truck out in the barn. I found keys to the garage and the mailbox and the shed and a padlock I couldn't place. Nothing that fit the office. So I got the pry bar out of the truck. The lock was old and the frame was old, and it took me maybe 90 seconds. The door swung in with that little side doors make when they've been shut a long time. I don't know what I was expecting. Something bad, I guess. Some reason for the locked door. A room full of empty bottles maybe, or something worse. That's what you tell yourself to prepare for. It was just an office, a desk under the window, 2 leather chairs, a rug I recognized from photographs of my grandfather, bookshelves on 3 walls, mostly history and law, a green banker's lamp. The window looked out on the back field and the tree line and the ridge behind it. A pen on the blotter, capped, a ring where a coffee mug had sat and been moved. Ordinary, neat, a little dusty, but not much, which meant he'd been in here recently. On the desk was a stack of manila folders, maybe 15 of them, arranged in a neat pile with the edges lined up the way he lined everything up. The one on top had my name on it, just the first name, in his handwriting, on the tab. I stood in the doorway, looking at it for a while. Then I sat down in his chair, which still had the shape of him in the seat, and I opened it. It was me. Photocopies of my high school report cards, my SAT scores, a printout of my college acceptance letter, which I had never shown him because weren't speaking that spring. A photograph of me at graduation that I did not know existed, taken from far enough away that I hadn't seen him there. I turned it over. No note on the back, no date. Maybe he hadn't been there at all. Maybe someone had taken it for him. I opened the next folder, my first job, the company news leader that had a paragraph about me being hired, my apartment lease from 2011, or a copy of it, I don't know how he got it, a photograph of the building. The next one had my first wedding in it, program from the ceremony. He hadn't come. He had sent a card and a check, and I had cashed the check and thrown the card away, but he had the program. He had a photograph of us on the church steps, taken from across the parking lot. There was a folder for my divorce, court records, which are public, but still, a folder for my second marriage, a folder for each of my kids, with their school pictures in them, the ones my ex sends out at Christmas. He'd kept every single one. I hadn't known he'd kept any. There were articles. A trade magazine had done a profile on me in 2017. He had 2 copies. He had the local paper from my hometown, from a story about me speaking at the high school in 2019, which I had done as a favor and forgotten about the same week. He had a printout of my LinkedIn. He had, and this is the one I sat with for a long time, a handwritten list of the addresses I'd lived at since I left home, all of them in order, including the one in Baltimore I've been at for 6 years. Some of the pages had margin notes in pencil, small, in his hand, dates, question marks next to things. Next to the Baltimore address, he'd written "Good Neighborhood." The last folder was thinner. It had this year in it, a photograph of me at a conference in Richmond in April, taken from behind, from maybe 40 feet away. I never saw him. A printout of an interview I did for a podcast in June, and a card, still in its envelope, addressed to me at my current house. Never sent. I opened the card. It said in his handwriting, "I saw the piece in the magazine. I was proud of you." That was all. No signature, no date. I sat in that office until the light in the window was gone, and then a while longer, in the dark. I did not cry, exactly. I don't know what I did. I sat there. Eventually I got up, and I took the folders out to the car in 3 trips, and I put them on the passenger seat. The night air felt colder than it had that morning. I could see my breath under the porch light. I locked the house, and I drove home Sunday morning, and I put the folders in a closet in my study, and I shut the door. That was 2 years ago now. I've read them in pieces since. A folder every few months, on a quiet weekend, when I have the stomach for it. There's still 4 I haven't opened. I don't know when I will. He never called me first, not once, my whole adult life. I always thought it was because he didn't want to. I understand now it was something else, though I couldn't tell you exactly what. I'm not sure he could have either. That was the shape of him, a closed door with the light on underneath, and a man on the other side keeping track. I've been a conference interpreter for 11 years, and the first rule they teach you in the booth is that you are furniture. You are a voice. You are not a person in the room. Nobody looks at you. Nobody remembers your face. That is the whole point. I want to be very clear about that before I tell you what happened in October 2022, because it matters. It matters that he looked at me. The job was on the 34th floor of a building on 3rd Avenue in Midtown. Private negotiation between a group of American attorneys and a delegation flown in from Eastern Europe. 6 men one side, 4 on the other, plus assistants and a notary. I was in the booth with a colleague who was doing another language pair. My job was English to Russian, Russian to English. 3 hours, 1 break. The booth was one of those pop-up ones you rent from a company in New Jersey. Glass on 3 sides, soundproofed, tucked in the back corner of the conference room with a clear line of sight to the table, fluorescent light, 1 water bottle. The smell of new carpet glue that gave me a headache by the end of the first hour. Nothing about the meeting felt unusual at first. Contracts, wire transfers. A dispute over a warehouse in Rotterdam, standard business Russian, the kind I could do in my sleep after a decade of it. The American lawyers were the loud ones, leaning back in their chairs, cracking jokes I had to flatten into neutral Russian so they wouldn't offend anyone. The Russians were polite and quiet. 4 of them wore near identical gray suits. The 5th wore black. He was the oldest man at the table by 20 years, easy, late 70s, maybe 80. Thin white hair combed straight back. He didn't touch the water in front of him. He didn't take notes. When his people spoke, he watched the Americans' faces, not their mouths. And when the Americans spoke, he watched the ceiling. He said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. When he did speak, it was so quiet I had to lean into the microphone on my end and turn my gain up 2 notches. His voice had that dry, patient quality that certain elderly men have when they've spent their whole lives being listened to without having to raise their voice. The younger men in gray deferred to him in small ways, little pauses before they answered, eyes flicking to him first. Around the 2-hour and 40-minute mark, one of the American lawyers made a joke about Dutch customs officers. I rendered it into something diplomatic. The Russian side chuckled politely. The old man did not. He set his hand flat on the table. Everyone stopped. He said, in Russian, something short and administrative about needing to clarify a point in the previous clause. His people nodded. The Americans nodded, waiting for me. He turned his head, slowly, and looked directly at the booth. At me, through the glass, across maybe 30 feet of conference room, past his own delegation, past the notary, straight at my face, and he held it. I have been looked at in a booth before. Occasionally a speaker gets curious about who's making him sound clever in another language, and they glance over. It lasts a second. This was not that. He said my name, not loudly, in the same measured Russian he'd used all afternoon, folded neatly into what sounded like a continuation of his previous sentence, so smoothly that the microphones probably picked it up as filler. But it was my first name, my actual first name, the one on my passport, not the professional name I use on contracts. Then he said, still in Russian, still looking right at me, "Do not translate what I say next. This is not for them." I froze. My colleague next to me didn't react. She was on the French channel, headphones on, not listening to the Russian feed. The old man waited. 2 seconds. 3. He knew I had heard him. He was giving me time to decide. I did the thing you are trained never to do. I muted my microphone. Then he spoke again. 6, maybe 7 sentences, slow, deliberate Russian in that same quiet register, while he looked me in the eye and the rest of the room waited for the translation that wasn't coming. I am not going to tell you what he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I have not told my husband. I have not told the agency. I have not told the 2 therapists I saw afterward. I have carried it for over 2 years now, and I intend to carry it for the rest of my life, because I believe him, and I believe that repeating it would undo the reason he told me not to translate it. What I can tell you is this. When he was finished, he looked at the head of the American delegation and said, in Russian, a completely different sentence. A bland, formal question about an appendix in the contract. I unmuted. I translated the bland question. The lawyer answered. The meeting continued. Not one person on either side of that table understood that anything had happened. We finished at 6:15. Handshakes, business cards. The Americans went for drinks. The Russian delegation filed out. The old man was last. He walked toward the door, then stopped, turned, and walked over to the booth. He tapped the glass once with 2 fingers, very gently, the way you'd tap an aquarium. He didn't smile. He slid a plain white envelope under the edge of the sliding panel where the cables came out. Then he left. I sat in the booth for a long time after everyone was gone. My colleague packed her things and asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. She left. The cleaners started on the far end of the room, moving chairs, and I still had not touched the envelope. I opened it on the subway home, which was stupid, because if my hands were going to shake, I would rather they had shaken in private. Inside was a single sheet of hotel stationery, folded once. On it, in blue ballpoint, in neat block capitals, my street, my building number, my apartment number, the cross street, the name of the coffee shop on my corner, the morning I usually went in, and underneath, one line in English. Thank you for not translating. They were not meant to know. I did not go home that night. I stayed with a friend in Astoria and told her I'd had a bad breakup, which was the only lie I could think of on short notice. I moved apartments 3 months later. New building, new borough, no forwarding address. Mail held at a P.O. box for a year. I never found out who he was. The agency that booked me was a pass-through. The client on the invoice was a Shell LLC that dissolved 4 months after the meeting. I looked at first, and then I made myself stop looking because I understood something on that subway ride that I have not been able to shake. He did not slip me that envelope to threaten me. He slipped it to show me he could have, and whatever he told me in those 6 or 7 sentences I have never repeated to another living person. He needed me to understand all the way down that he was the kind of man who was telling the truth.